Datatopics.
Welcome to the Data.
Welcome to the Datatopics podcast.
Hello and welcome to Datatopics Unplugged, your casual corner of the web where we discuss what's new in data every week from 2024 to 2025. Anything goes. See what I did there? That's pretty,
Nice.
I just made it up now. Today is the 10th. Oh, no, it's 10 a.m. It's the December 2nd of 2024. My name is Murillo. I'll be hosting you today. I'm joined by the one and only Bart.
Hi.
And we have a new super duper special guest. Yannick. Hey Yannick, how are you?
Hi guys, thanks for having me over.
Yeah?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Start sweating already or not yet?
Slightly, but
It's okay.
I'll try to keep it for
He
myself.
just confided in us that this is the very first time he's on a podcast.
Exactly. So we're taking his...
So we're,
Yes,
we-
handle with care.
yeah. Were you waiting your first time to be with some special people?
we feel honored.
Yeah, I
We
was
feel
like,
honored.
nah, man.
Cuties.
Okay.
No,
cool.
thanks guys for having me over.
No, happy to have you here. For the people that don't know you yet, would you like to give a quick intro?
Definitely. So my name is Yannick van der Capelle, as you can see. I joined Dataroots half a year ago. Have a bit of a general background. I think majority of my career was bridging business with IT and data. So a bit, let's say, more on the business IT or business technical spectrum. Originally from Antwerp, you will not notice by my accent. And I think, definitely happy to be here today and happy to contribute. And I think my role, Dataroots, is a bit on the strategic side and a bit on the business side. So a bit on the client-focused spectrum.
Very cool. And as I can imagine, as part of your role, you have to be in tune with what's happening in the AI and data landscape, right? You also have a bit of a high-level view of how the market is shifting and where things are going. And that's why we thought it would be a great idea. And also, since we are nearing the end of the year, to have a little bit of a look back and a look forward. Can we play the harp, like a look back? She's thinking. So look back.
Oh, wow.
It's January 2024, right? So months ago. Now going through the year, let's we have prepared a few topics here. In the AI adoption, for example, and strategic impact, is there anything that stood out for both of you? Anything that, if you were to look back on 2024, what would you say? How would you summarize 2024 in the AI adoption and strategic impact domain or area?
Yeah, I think first of all, what you mentioned, the speed of change has been crazy. It's like just trying to catch up, following everything.
Indeed.
I think there was a lot of content about waking up another Monday, like all of a sudden you have new models, new players, new actors.
Yeah, maybe indeed it moves so fast. One little side fun fact, I saw that I think yesterday it was a ChatGPT turned 2 years old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
2 years, huh?
Only
2 years, huh? And it's crazy. I mean, for people that have listened to us, like every week we talk about GenAI and every week, so it's like it's really insane, huh?
Mm-hmm.
It's insane. Yeah. Sorry, but I didn't mean to cut you.
No, but I think it's the key takeaway is the rapid change of change. And if I bridge it towards our data partners and the companies where we co-create ideas, I think 2024 was definitely about creating a valuable roadmap, about creating what is actually tangible, what is actually creating value, and what is sufficiently mature to apply inside a company context. I think that's one side of the key takeaway, that 2024 was not about, we need to do something with AI, but making it more specific and making it more tangible. Like, what are we actually going to do?
Yeah.
I think the year before with the GenAI, everyone was blown away, what's happening? And I also think that everybody wanted to do something, but I'm not going to say that a lot of people were clueless, but
yeah,
definitely saw that transition, I think, in 2024.
Yeah, and Bart, you have a face like you have something very, you guys bring it home.
No, it's been an interesting year. Like you were saying, ChatGPT is only 2 years old. A lot of different evolutions.
And now I think if you look back maybe a year and a half, ChatGPT I think was the main one. And I think this year, now, I would say we have way more players, right? I think Anthropic has I think even for coding, for example, what I see is like Anthropic is normally better than OpenAI's models. Gemini also is investing like with the Google, right? Facebook with the Llama models as well. So I think, yeah, I also feel like there's a bit more diversity now as well on true competitors, you know, like some people, I think, yeah, like I said, Anthropic today is maybe better in some domains than OpenAI's models, but I don't know if last year I would have said that.
Yeah, not sure if I 100% agree.
Yeah?
There are a lot of different players, but we had that also a year ago, and I think, but it's been a while that I saw the estimated numbers. But a while is 2 months or something, where OpenAI was by far the biggest in terms of usage,
Yeah.
like 80% of the market, and then a lot of the rest of the 20 goes to Anthropic, and the rest are very, very small players in terms of actual usage that is known publicly.
But would you say that Anthropic, like December last year, would you have foreseen this? Because I agree. I also think a lot of people are using OpenAI, and even clients, like even if someone is on AWS and they want to tap into the GenAI, and I guess when we're saying AI adoption, right now we're talking a lot about GenAI, right? So just to separate the terms a bit. A lot of people, even if you are on AWS, people still create an account on Azure, just use the Azure OpenAI, right? So it's still, I still see that indeed. But when you think of like the quality of the models and all these things, I do see a lot of noise about Anthropic's models, for example. Something that maybe it's just my perception, but I think
they're definitely challenging. Yeah, that I agree with.
But that's the thing, and I also wonder if it's just.
But what I'm trying to say is that I don't think there's a lot of different serious competitors. I think you have OpenAI and you have Anthropic, and then you have a lot of small ones.
Yeah, for a market that is still very young, it's actually curious to see that you already have like very dominant players.
Yeah, but I think indeed, my hypothesis is indeed like OpenAI is still dominating, but I think it's more because they were the first one to really make a lot of noise, and everyone really discovered GenAI through OpenAI's models. And I feel like there are some, we saw some articles on TechnoShare and our internal sharing of news and topics and all these things, that people are already hypothesizing that they reached another limit on the GenAI models, right? So if you reach a limit, maybe just a matter of time until the other people really catch up, right? So I'm not sure, I'm just hypothesizing here, but compared to last year, I do see, like in terms of the quality of the models, I do see there's a bigger distribution. Not in terms of adoption.
I agree that Anthropic is much closer to.
But would you say just
OpenAI.
Anthropic?
Well, I think there you have Gemini as well. There is, especially in Europe, you hear about Mistral, but I have the feeling less and less.
Yeah, that I also
versus
agree.
last year.
Last year, I feel like Mistral was more.
I think the only challengers, if we don't talk about OpenAI and Anthropic, are probably Google and Facebook these days.
Which is Llama and Gemini, right?
Yeah.
For people.
Yeah, maybe also from a sourcing budget capabilities point of view, I think it's going to be hard to let out of the blue if we cut out all the Japanese or Chinese alternatives. I think we're more or less done in terms of options in the market at the moment.
Yeah, that's true. Indeed, and there are some like these. You have Alibaba that is publishing an open source model. Like there are some non-Western model alternatives, but never really looked into them in depth.
Yeah, maybe looking back to like 2024 as well. What I more or less noticed was like 2023 was like the year that everybody on a business side was like banning all the options. It was like calculating tools in the late 80s. Like everybody said at school you have to work without them. Like 2024 was like starting to embrace it, and like 2025 will be like embedding it.
Yeah, it's good.
I think that's sort of like a fair evolution. Like 2024, everybody's like, okay, we cannot keep ignoring it.
Yeah.
25 is like, okay, it's still a standalone option. Maybe it's better that we implement it in our operating model.
Yeah, I agree. I also, I think this is, I agree. I think you see a lot of that with new technologies in general. I do think with GenAI in particular, it was faster because I think there was a lot of attention to it. But I think indeed, like this year, I see I noticed more projects. A lot of the projects were still like POCs, right? So basically, people that are interested but are not fully trusting yet, right? So they're still doing some experimentations. And I think now We already see more people that actually want to integrate the business's processes. They understand a bit more the risks. They understand more a bit. Like, you're not gonna, I mean, some people, right? But they're not gonna replace humans, right? But it's gonna be something really next to people that is still someone's gonna validate. Like, if an AI model is gonna write your email, you're still gonna read it and check to see if it's what you want to say, et cetera, right? So I would expect that next year we'll see more of the projects that maybe won't be large scale, but I do expect that we'll have more of the GenAI things in production, like things that are actually embedded in the processes.
Yeah. And then like next phase could be like productionizing it. It would be one thing, but it would still be internal focused. And then maybe 2026 we even see more maturity on external focused models in production, because I do think companies and the partnerships we currently have, the projects we're running, even if it goes all the way to production, where we definitely have a role to play, then we still feel that there's, let's say, a bit of a fear of actually getting external focused AI project on the roadmap, where there's really a client exposure, where there's really an unsupervised interaction with the customer. I do think that's still the next gap we need to close from a maturity point of view.
Agree.
To me, it comes to GenAI, like we've seen GenAI as a service
Like
really taking up. Like you have like just an API endpoint that you need to call to get something. I think that you had that in 2023 as well, but it has become a bit the de facto standard with pros and cons. Like it makes that it's very easy to integrate into your product, in your workflow. Downside is like you also need to use it because it's become so big. Like running these models is not that easy. Like you can do it, but it requires a lot of custom engineering. But because like you have now GenAI as a service, it becomes super easy to integrate into your workflow. That also combined with multimodal, which I think now has become the default, but it's still very
definitely
recently.
2024. Multimodal is also one of the things I noted down. It's like it went so fast that we almost forgot that it didn't initially start at multimodal.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and for the people that don't know. Like this was, I think GPT-4o was the first that supported it, and it was released only in May of this year. And it basically means like I have a screenshot, paste it into ChatGPT, make a summary of that screenshot, do something with it, generate another image with it, play it out in audio, like these type of things. Like you really mix and match with this type of approach, and that makes it as very easy to integrate these type of things into your processes. And I think there is also, like when it comes to adoption, today still a bit of a challenge. I think because there is also a lot of hype on this, and what you see is that a lot of companies, like they see this as super strategic, super big projects, very risk averse, and then typically this ends up like, let's build a chatbot, but let's be very certain that it doesn't say the wrong things. Let's make sure that we have a knowledge base with a RAG-based architecture, that it always gives back the right information. And these become very big projects. And in the end, hopefully you have a useful chatbot. But there's so much more you can do. Like we're integrating it in today in processes where you say, okay, I have this text, I have all these, for example, for us internally, there's all these business opportunities, summarize them, give an overview. Something very simple.
Yeah, including scoring, including enforcing it and so forth.
And this is like literally built with like a few hours, right? This is before that would have been so complex to do, and all these small time automations where you have like small time automations become simple because like in LLM is very easy to go from noisy data to something structured, and I think that is where you can have like a lot of small automations result in big wins.
Yeah,
that is.
I think a lot of traditional OCR projects, a lot of named entity projects, where like typically companies would like have a workforce, like really manually processing fax confirmations, old school banking activity, transaction and trade confirmations, where the go-to market of a back old school traditional AI project would be costly, would be very time consuming, and would be very narrow. You could train one template, and then if you would like to duplicate it for another stakeholders, it's very, very big. And now you can like more or less I think not entirely erased, but the setup is completely different, and also that part of the landscape completely changed. And I don't know if everybody's like fully aware of that impact as well. Indeed.
Yeah, and I think there is. I think there's a risk in going too big today, because it's from the moment it's a big project, you end up in often a multi man year project. Maybe it doesn't take multiple years, but multiple man years. And the reality is that the technology also so quickly evolves. So it's super hard. Like even if you use the knowledge that is out there today, if you have a project that runs 6 months, it's maybe your approach is maybe going to be outdated, because a lot of standards are not there yet. And I think especially when it comes to RAG, like basically injecting a knowledge base into your LLM.
Yeah, what you say there, Bart, is actually quite funny. It reminds me of all the shell and wrapper companies, like all the companies that were built on the V1 endpoint of the models. Also, 2024 was also the year where half of them just got like completely, let's say, killed by the rapid evolution of those providers. There was a lot of funding and a lot of startups actually just building a shell on top of those models. And I think 2024 was also definitely a year where a lot of them actually got a very brutal wake-up call.
But I also think that, I don't know if we talked about it throughout the year, but a lot of these, there were a lot of startups or little apps that were like indeed a thin layer on top of these models, that you could kind of see that it was a matter of time until OpenAI would actually implement these things, right? Like if it's a thin layer, they could also make it part of, like, I don't know, the creating queries from text, right? There was actually even on True Tools, and this was before the GenAI boom, right? There was also some on a startup that we talked to. But like things like that I also, as I saw, I was like, this is really cool. But if one person from OpenAI says, "Oh, this is really cool, we should include this on our thing," that's kind of it, right?
Yeah.
Boom, so, incoming codex.
Yeah, indeed. So it's like, it's kind of, True. You could in a way you could foresee it a bit, but I still think it's, in a way, it's also important that people kind of go out and try to publish these things, so we can also get more ideas and maybe do this and kind of move as a community, right? One thing I wanted to also touch, you mentioned like multimodal, and I do agree that this was a big. Now it's so common, right? Like you kind of expect your models to be able to deal with images and all these things. Maybe not video as much. I'm not sure about video capabilities.
Just less,
Less. But I see that, but I'm not sure, like it is available, but I still think that it's a bit more immature in the sense that I don't see a lot of POCs or projects or something that really leverage the multimodality yet.
So
or even just images in general. I think image generation today, it still feels to me like it's a bit more like for fun.
Generation, maybe I agree.
But editing, indeed.
So
actually, that's true. Adobe has
image extension, stuff like that.
I know really there was a video from Adobe that they could show like you could select a character and then you can use AI to generate different poses and you can rotate the 2D character to different poses. That was super cool. Even like the guy was doing a live demo and the crowd goes, "Whoa!" It's like you're doing a good job when when you're like a promo of a product and people are like, "Whoa!"
But also, like if you extend it, like something like Canva, which is used a lot in marketing, like you have a lot of GenAI generated templates and stuff like that.
That's true.
And maybe, so to me, like multimodal in combination with as a service, so you have an endpoint, makes it super accessible. And actually, because you see a lot of these more convenience tools pick it up, like it's super easy to integrate into Zapier.
Yeah.
It's super easy to integrate into, for example, home automation. I have a good use case. Not this weekend, the weekend before. So I have a small home assistance setup, which is a smart home software, and it integrates with my smart doorbell. And like in, I think 10 minutes time, I set up an integration that if someone rings my doorbell, it will via audio let me know if it's the postman, and if it's a package, if it's Bpost or PostNL, because it's on the van. It actually reads it from the van. So basically what happens is it takes a picture, sends it to OpenAI with a specific prompt, gets back the result and plays it on the stereo. And that's like in 10-15 minutes setup. Like that is unimaginable 2 years ago.
No, I definitely agree. And I think that's a very good use case.
And these are super small automations which do add some value, right? And it's not going to be life changing, but I think the small things that you can do add them up, especially in a business context where there are a lot of manual processes, where there is a lot of noise. This can really help.
But then I think I agree, and I think I also agree that it's a good use case. I'm wondering if you think of these things because you're in the know, like you know how these things go and you think of critically and you're a very creative person. But I'm also wondering if someone that is a business person that wants to implement these things, if they're going to think of that, if they're going to know that it's reliable enough, if they're going to, so I think he's like, I see there's a lot of tinkering.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe next year you'll see more applications and maybe the POCs, because even today, to be honest, I don't see still a lot of like the POC stuff yet, right? But I do agree that the capabilities are there. But I feel like, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think there is an opportunity to leverage these things more. And for us to think a bit more like the use case you just presented, like what are good use cases for using the multimodality?
Yeah.
And now we're just talking about text. Actually, there's also audio generation, right? So there's a bit of all the components there. So, but yeah.
But I think one of the challenges today, and we often capture it under hallucination, but I think it's more performance, is like what keeps businesses from really widespread adoption.
Yeah.
Like look at our internal process. We sometimes get a validation from customers on hours we performed, and based on that we make an invoice, right? Like there's an email and you need to make an invoice. That theoretically would be, like even with Zapier, would be super easy to automate. But we're a bit hesitant because what if the hours are not correctly interpreted?
Yeah.
Right? Like you still have this hesitation.
But
that
two things on that. One, I think, maybe people, and I think we already do, but like people in general need to reframe it a bit. Like it's not going to do the job for you, but it's going to, instead of you having to type everything, you're just going to read it, right?
Yeah.
And the text, you can assume it's right. And if it's not right, okay, it's going to be, there's no profanity, whatever. But like you just need to check the numbers. This is the most important thing. So you can still, one person can do five people's time, whatever. Like it's a 5x invoicer,
exactly.
Which is already a very big win. The other thing I also think is, like, if I see a chatbot today, I would a bit expect that it uses ChatGPT. So I think people are getting more educated as well on these models, right? So I think people are not like just thinking that it's everything there is right. So even if you see a chatbot in a service or something, people will question it a bit more, I feel. So and I think it's the same thing. Yeah, people are using ChatGPT. They see the hallucinations. Now, if there's a chatbot, they kind of expect some GenAI models. And I think the hallucinations, they're not as intolerable in a way, because you kind of understand how you see this in other contexts. You're a bit more educated on these things. For example, if I go to a website and I search for something, like a just searching thing, I would expect the sources there. Right? Like if I'm really just Google information, like Perplexity AI or Find.com, right? Because I understand that like if I'm searching for information that is very important, I want to know that this came from sources and I want to be able to verify the sources there. Yeah. If it just gives me something like this, I'm going to be a bit skeptical, right? Or if I'm not skeptical, it's because I don't care as much about the correctness of the information, right? And I would expect that, people are a bit more tolerant to some of these things because they understand a bit better.
I think when it comes to chatbots specifically, we've had a big wave of chatbots before GenAI. Yeah, which I think nobody was
bad experience.
Nobody was really happy with it. I think the only upside that GenAI will give is that you can interpret noisy data, be it the request of someone that asks a question, and that you can take actions on that. Like if you just do interaction, like just reply, you will very quickly get the same fatigue. Like maybe it is going to be a bit more creative in the answering, but it's going to come down to the same thing. You're going to ask, can I talk to a real person? I think what you can do now with GenAI, when we talk about chatbots, is that you interpret this customer wants to get a copy of his invoice and automatically have like this forwarded to an automated agent that gives back this. Like it's more easy to interpret and to automate these type of actions.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe
I think that is the big uplift of GenAI in chatbots. Not necessarily that the frequently asked questions is going to be better.
Yes, I agree, but I guess my thing is more like, for example, Apple Intelligence is a good example, right? Something that big company, they took their time and now they came to market, and we can even talk about the privacy concerns and all these things.
The fact that we all buy a new iPhone and still are unable to use the AI capabilities, right?
I didn't buy a new iPhone yet, but indeed. But I think it's like something that made noise, and I think they had an interesting approach of if you're going to use you can ask Siri something, but Siri will say, "Oh, let me ask ChatGPT," right? So they explicitly voice it, and I think if there's a hallucination, yeah, it's ChatGPT. You can expect that there may be some hallucination there. I mean, the models are getting better and better, right? So I think hallucination is less of a problem these days. But I think it goes to a bit to kind of people, like when you give you information, you know how reliable it is. You know the risk that you give in there, because now I'm saying, yeah, it is ChatGPT, right? And I think in terms of like educating the users of these bots or these assistants, there is also a difference there, right? I feel like the hallucination, like when 2 years ago, 1 year and a half ago, when ChatGPT was really booming, the hallucination thing was really screaming on your face. Like a lot of people were like even getting a bit disillusioned because of these hallucination things, right? And I think today, if you see something, it's going to be less of a scandal.
Mm. I think it's tightly linked to everything regarding the hype cycle, like also
True.
traditional vibe. I think like there's a bit of a disillusion. There's a bit of people that say like, yeah, is it actually going to bring business value beyond just playing around, beyond just experimenting? And maybe referring back to the original question that you asked, like I think also us being very much into the data topic, very much into the scene.
Data topics.
Oh yeah. Accidentally mentioned that. Creates like definitely a bias, if you ask me. Like we're on a day-to-day basis trying to follow up, trying to catch up. We name drop casually multimodal, LLM, rack structure. And then you have companies. I'm not gonna say trapped in business as usual, but having like a multi-year IT roadmap, budget planning exercise a year in advance. There's a traditional saying, "Soy shit of yesterday." That they're very busy with all their operations.
Yeah,
and then they have a lot of governance, a lot of structure, and so I get why people in 2024 are looking at valuable use cases, because they have to defend ROI, they have to defend the business case, and they have to battle against IT and data projects that are already on the roadmap for multiple years. So I think that's why adoption, that's why we think that it's strange to maybe see the first POCs now, but actually from a company's perspective, they're growing, they're changing, and they're actually adopting. Yeah. They're just adopting maybe at a more general
there's
pace.
A lag, right?
Yeah, at a general pace.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Which is fair and which is positive, but it could make us a bit biased in saying, like, I'm not seeing all that much production-ready cases actually currently in the market.
Yeah.
If we just, let's say, cut out the major players out there, or like the really tech-first companies, if we look more at, let's say, at the incumbents in the market, I do think, referring back to your question, that the lag is quite obvious. And I also, let's say, a week ago, read some metrics about the amount of people that, like, for example, in Belgium and in Europe actually used GenAI on a day-to-day basis, on a weekly basis. The uplift is still really, really big.
Yeah.
So we're just, let's say, we are ahead because we're in it on a day-to-day basis, but like general companies in their operating model on a day-to-day basis, we're still far from maximal usage and impact.
No, and I think you make a very good point. I think when you look from the other perspective, it makes a lot more sense. Maybe a question, is there a way is there a better way? Well, I'm just not sure there's a better way, or if it is better. But suppose that we want to shorten the lag. Is there something that businesses could do in terms of strategy, in terms of something like this?
It's exactly what we do. It's actually what we do. So I think we also 23 and 24, let's definitely the beginning of 2023 and 24 was, I think, if you could summarize it in one word, it would be FOMO. Like everybody was like, oh, the boardroom was like, oh no, we have no AI on the roadmap. It's like,
yeah.
And so it was, let's say, it's a bit, the purpose was maybe to put AI on the roadmap and not to create value. So it was more from a FOMO perspective.
Yeah.
And I do also think that 2024, I think that's how we opened today's podcast, is like the pivot into tangible use cases with tangible value and a proven outcome.
Yeah.
And that's where we as Data Roots also play a very active role, and we have the experience. Data Roots was in AI before the hype, was in AI before GenAI.
Yeah.
And that gives us like this leapfrogging effect that we can have when we partner up with companies.
Yeah.
And actually there we see that, speaking about tangible use cases, then we go beyond. We go beyond the FOMO, and it just, if it mentions AI, it's good.
Yeah.
I think 2024 was a good year, and like that's not gonna make it work.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think maybe just to re-emphasize a point for the people that are listening, but maybe not as in the know as we are. But yeah, indeed, there's AI and there's GenAI. We're using a bit of terms interchangeably here. But if you think of AI, like neural networks is like the 1900s. There was already some stuff, image recognition, machine learning, data science, machine learning. All these things are still happening. I think what's the really on the spotlight these days is the GenAI, which is what we're talking about here. So just to, for people listening, like we're talking mainly about GenAI here, if not exclusively. I'm not.
But it's a good thing we could bridge to AI, because then we reach to MLOps, and like
That's true.
Still a lot of companies prototyping in AI, but also there the challenges to put it in production.
Exactly.
Monitor the drift of the model, monitor like how do we cope with data. So also that's, I think, something that in 2024 also really kept maturing.
Indeed, I agree. I think indeed, like, I think for MLOps is a bit of a more mature topic. I think in terms of like, yeah, basically MLOps for people that are not as familiar with the term, the way I see very simplistically is like once you're putting these things in production, what are the other things that go around the models, right? Like you said, monitoring, is the data drifting? Do we need to retrain the models? Even just deploying models, how to make it simple and easy and scalable, et cetera, et cetera. And now thinking again of 2025, if GenAI, we expect there to be more production use cases, then there's also going to be maybe more the GenAI ops, right? So, or the LLM ops, right? The stuff that goes around these models that are not necessarily the prompting, they're not necessarily experimenting these things. It is a bit of a different beast because you're not training these models. But all these things like how do you track your how many tokens you're using? How do you track how many because you can put like guardrails, right, to make sure that the models are not using profanity, for example. Simple example, how many times does this hit, right? How many times are you getting caught by the guardrails? So like all these things, how do you monitor these models when it's time to upgrade, when it's time to do this, if you want to change a prompt and you're classifying like the named entity recognition, right? Is this better, is it worse, et cetera, et cetera. So all these things is maybe something that we can also expect more in the next year.
Yeah, you can go on. It's also about context. It's about reinforcing general models, like the big models, reinforcing it for your local context. I think everything GenAI ops. I do think it's a good terminology.
It's just put like ops in it. Sounds cool.
No, but it's true. It's actually if you want to go from Labo/POC prototyping to industrializing actually that being part of your operating model, that also means that business will require uptime, that they expect it to maybe less hallucinate or be more predictable, that
indeed,
and that you need to document it, and that you need to like who's the owner, then you come back in like more IT driven transformations if you really want to make it company first. True.
I think when it comes to LLM ops, LLMs is still such a young field. I think we will see advances in components. I don't think we see a consolidation yet.
No, I agree.
LLM ops is still very broad. Like it's prompt optimization, it's testing, it's automated deployment, it's monitoring, it's active guardrails. Like, and we will see, I think, a lot of improvements in each of these specific fields. But I don't think the ML flow of LLMs will be there next year.
That I agree.
Or DVC or
that I agree. But I do think that.
But I agree with that. There will be a lot of advancement in that, because it's an answer to this is something risky because it's a bit probabilistic. We're not 100% sure, and good LLM practices give a partial answer to that.
Indeed, I think maybe like best practices, they may not be there because indeed it's early, and I feel like the frameworks and technologies, there's not a clear winner, there's not a clear standard. I think even in terms of like you mentioned, APIs for the models, I'm not sure if all the models kind of follow the same API, or like, for example, tool calling, if they all have there. So it is a bit immature in the sense, but I think the questions that we're going to ask to make sure we can trust these things, they're going to be tackled. And I think because there's an attention to that, I would imagine that the frameworks, they're going to become more mature on that space fairly quickly maybe.
And I think the nice thing of that is if you have a good LLM ops setup, then it also becomes relatively easy to just switch it out for another model as a service and see what the performance is.
Indeed, but I think I guess that's what I was thinking as well. You kind of need a common standard between these models, right? Like if you are using OpenAI today, OpenAI, you have model validation, which maybe you don't need for, like, you can do it yourself in a way. But like tool calling, all these things, you kind of need to have some standards, right? And I think not all the models are there yet. But so we're tackling a bit like, what are the challenges, right? We're talking about next year. What are some other challenges that you can also see that you can expect? Well, challenges that maybe you had, but more importantly, what are the challenges that you can foresee for next year? We mentioned LLM ops. Is there something else that you can think of? And I'm hinting a bit at
when it comes to AI adoption. So I think what we RAG, retrieval augmented generation, which basically means when I ask something to my LLM, it's going to try to fetch relevant data, relevant information from my knowledge base, and give an answer based on that. I think today that is still very, very ad hoc. Like you try to build something that is suited for the LLM, that is suited for the legacy system that you might have, the unstructured data that you might have. And I think within now and definitely 5 years, and I think already next year, we will see RAG as a service.
And I actually have maybe, I don't know how hot this take is, but I actually think that RAG systems are going to be replaced by agentic workflows kind of thing. And maybe
I don't think they will go away.
But before, I'll just explain what I mean for people that are not as familiar with the terms.
It could be the elephant in the room next year.
But let's maybe just before we go into agentic, because it's another evolution that we're seeing.
Yes.
So I think what we've seen this year is that the big providers already have this to some extent. They have RAG as a service. Azure has it. OpenAI has it. I don't know if Anthropic has it, to be honest, if you use their platform directly. So you already see this, but when it's more than a frequently asked questions use case, you quickly run into its limitations. At the same time, we're seeing the big open source databases like Postgres having extensions where you can do really embedding vector search fully in database. It's really becoming there's a lot of attention on this. So I think the performance of this RAG as a service will really go up in the next year.
Yeah, maybe if, but when you say vector search, that's a component of RAG.
Yeah, but even so how that needs to require us to delve into a little bit what it is.
Yeah,
but so
maybe can you explain maybe what are the very Eli 5.
So let's say that you have give me an example of a knowledge base.
Ice cream shop.
Yeah, you're working at an ice cream shop, and there are instructions. There's a big manual on how to make different type of scoop sizes and flavors, and how you can combine them. Let's say that this is a 500-page document. It's really an artisanal ice shop. It takes a lot of time to get people to read these 500 pages, right? And so in other words, it takes a lot of time to train people when they're new. What you could do is that you take this knowledge base, these 500 pages, you then embed them into vectors. You split this up into relevant things. It's already the difficult thing, how you need to chunk this 500 pages into something smaller. It's already a big question, how, and today a lot of manual work if you find how big do these chunks need to be. These chunks you then turn into vectors, into a vector supporting database. And that allows you to very easily search on this. And the searching is something else. The searching is, let's say I have a chatbot within my ice cream shop. And whenever and something new comes, you say, use this chatbot when you don't know something. And so this person, let's call this person Murillo,
hypothetically,
doesn't know how to make a vanilla ice cream with a medium-sized scoop. So he types it in, how do I make a vanilla ice cream with a medium-sized scoop? What then happens is that this question, in other words, a query from Murillo, is then turned into a vector. So it's called an embedding. So you need an embedding model there. So you have a vector, and then the database basically compares Murillo's question. What chunk is it closest to? And then it takes that chunk, takes the text of that chunk. Hopefully that is the description of how do you make a vanilla ice cream. Injects it into your LLM and basically uses a prompt we have an employee asking instructions about making ice creams. This is the relevant knowledge that you need to use for this answer. And this is his question, Murillo's question: how do I make vanilla ice cream with a medium-sized scoop? And that full prompt then gets run through an LLM, and hopefully you get the answer on how to make a vanilla ice cream with a medium-sized scoop. So that's a big process, and there's on each of those points. Today, there is a lot of optimization, manual optimization to do. And I think that full solution we will get out of the box as a service in the coming years.
And that full solution is RAG.
That full solution is RAG, and that full solution you can already, if you test a bit the boundaries, do, for example, in Postgres today.
Yeah, indeed. And the vector search is a part of that, and the generation part is part of that, indeed.
I think the contextualization is like so powerful.
Yeah.
That's like the big difference also in maturity of the output, in maturity of the use cases where you can potentially in the future embed it in.
But there are a lot of like the challenge today is like we're taking a very simple example, like but if you want to do this for someone that does customer support, and then you say, okay, all the knowledge that we have on customer support, inject it into a database and just automate it, it's not going to work, because probably there is this document on how to answer this question from 2 years ago, and there's the same document from a year ago, and there's not really consistent, and you're sometimes returning. Like there's a lot of things that happen.
I'm also wondering if there's a like for users, if you want to have a history of the user, and so you actually have personalized, and you cannot have like all the users together, right? Because I could say, oh Bart, how much? Why can't I make this payment now? And I say, oh Yannick, actually 2 days ago. You know, it's like doesn't make any sense. There's also privacy boundaries and all these things that we can hard code, right?
Imagine indeed that you can add the specific context of that client, and the context of the situation, so the domain context of the question. Boom. Yeah,
indeed, it gets very powerful, huh? And maybe and it's okay for like, do you want to talk a bit more about this, or
let's go on?
So for the agentic things, to be honest, like I did try to like, what is these agentic models
beyond the hype?
Yeah. So it's like I heard that basically if you're into working with LLMs or building these things, you probably heard agentic agents, agentic workflows, whatever. From what I gathered from research and all these things, and also what I see and what I try to do, people still use the term very loosely.
It's the new hype, right?
It's
going to be the hype of 2025.
Yeah. When I'm saying agentic workflows or agent or agents or whatever, I'm thinking of really models that have the tool calling capability. Okay, and then you can, as you interact with the tool, so for example, tool calling capability, you can really think of it as a Python function that the model can actually call, right? So it can be Google search, right? It can be a calculator. If I say, can you convert, or maybe a good example is like, can you convert? I'm from Brazil, so we have reais, and actually the dollar is really expensive right now, so probably euros as well. And I want to say, can you convert this to this, right? The model can actually understand the question, and maybe I have a euro to real converter, and you can get the latest information there, right? So it's not something that the model would know by itself. It can actually have a very deterministic block to it, and then from that it can give my answer. Right, so that's a bit of tool calling thing. And usually, when you're actually working with these models, there is a step that basically the model calls the output. It gets back the function. It gets the output, and then it continues processing these things. So that's kind of what I'm thinking of agentic. It's in a way you have a model that calls something external. It gets the response from the external thing, and then it keeps going. And then you can choose to make another call or not. In the context of RAG, one thing that I've come across is that a tool you can have is to actually do the vector search. So for example, if I say, what is the age of the two Dataroots founders combined? Maybe the first query will be, who are the Dataroots founders? And then you come up with Bart and Jonas. And maybe the second question would be, what are their ages? Right? So, but then you kind of have a bit of you don't need to do everything in one go, right? The model can actually have this step-by-step thing. Because if you just throw it out there, maybe the chunks that you will get will not be enough, because you also need to see how many chunks you need to pass in the model and all these things, right? Or the example that I saw in the little online course that I followed was, what's the temperature? No, what was it? Is it hotter? Or maybe a good adapting the query before. Who's older, Bart or Jonas? Right? And maybe it needs to get the age of Bart, the age of Jonas, and then you compare the two and say, okay, this and this. Maybe you can do it in parallel. Maybe you have to do sequentially, right? But the agents, they should be able to kind of figure these things out. And that's why I think, like, in a way, it's more abstracted than RAG, right? It's a bit more fluid, right? The vector search is just a function that the model can call. And you can still have this dependent information and following queries that you can have. And that's why I think that maybe the next year, the agentic search will be more common or more used, or there would be benefits to using that compared to just RAG. Even though I agree that RAG is simpler, and there are some already off-the-shelf kind of things, so it's easy to plug and play. But I do expect that as we go along more, these RAG systems will be replaced by more these agent search models.
I think they're really something different.
Yeah, I also want to add to that, but Bart, go ahead.
I think RAG is in your definition of an agent, RAG is just a tool. Where
Well,
you
I'm
can say
thinking
you
RAG
have knowledge to
the
these
vector
and these.
search is a tool. But that's what I mean. Like, that's why I try to make the distinction before. The vector search is a tool. RAG is the whole system. So if you take that component and you put it as a tool for the LLM,
I don't really agree there. So I think vector search can be a tool, yes, but an API where you can query. In other words, your RAG system can be a tool as well.
true.
Like I think,
That's true. That's true.
and in that sense, it will maybe improve the outcome. And that's a bit like the example that you're giving is like build a search strategy to come to the age of these two people, or to come to the maximum age, whatever the exact question was. But like, and you have access to these and these tools to do this within maximum 10 steps, and build out a path towards that, and to also make sure that's verified. And then maybe you're going to use that RAG, or maybe you're going to use a payroll API, or like you're going to give a bit more freedom to the quote unquote agent to do that. But to me, that's a bit like the evolution that we're also seeing with something for the people that use ChatGPT daily. What we're seeing with what's the name again of the thing that keeps that goes a bit further than just giving an immediate answer. That quote unquote things.
Reflect. No, it's the reflection, the O1 model or whatever.
The O1 model, thank you. Yeah. Where in O1 you also have this a bit like you get a first answer, and it's kind of
reasoning.
It's
models.
quote unquote reasoning.
It's
and it basically asks a bit like
That's the branding.
like is this the correct model? And are there other pathways that you can explore? And it tries to in its own go further, right? And I think when you add this type of reasoning to a large tool chain, like if you have a multiple chains, like it becomes hopefully very powerful.
Yeah, indeed. Because maybe also to add a bit on that, like the reasoning is also like there are empirical studies that show that when the model reasons on the previous output, it actually can detect hallucination and all these things better. Like there's some research on that as well, and that's why these reasoning steps, quote unquote reasoning, usually leads to better quality output, right? Which is also something, by the way, that I think if you're doing agentic search, you could be better, right? Because if you ask again, and I agree that a RAG can be a component instead of just a vector search, but if you have an agent that kind of like you have a query, and then the chunks are not the correct chunks, right? Maybe you ask for vanilla ice cream, and for some reason the chunk is about strawberry ice cream. Maybe the model would be able to say, okay, this is not correct. Maybe I need to do something else, right? So you can kind of reason it through.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, sorry. And you were going to say something as well, Yannick.
Yes. Maybe the agents, hot topic indeed. There's a lot of fuss, and definitely 2025 will hopefully define a bit the boundaries, because now agents, everybody has his own definition, I have the feeling. If you'd ask me, but not necessarily under the umbrella of agents, but how the future would look, then I would go beyond query and retrieval, but actually emphasize more on the tooling capability, as you mentioned. So actually book it for me, execute it for me, execute that update statement, do something where you really have like a wingman, but like an active co-pilot.
Yeah.
Not a co-pilot to query as your external hard disk or additional, let's say, computing power, but actually also somebody that can go the next mile and actually update your calendar, send a request to a hotel or something. So the tooling box on top of that agent capability for me is like a dream come true, because then you literally have that full force virtual assistant. That's for me the Agentic or the agent definition, but of course it's looking ahead and forward.
I think that may not be in 2025 yet, because also like if you have something that you make a payment and then the model makes a mistake, it's like, oh yeah, I bought a car for you, like, you know, it's like, whoa. But I think, and then it brings to another like bit tangential topic to this that I also I read about it and I hear about it and I see courses about it. I don't see as much applications. Is with like the human in the loop kind of thing, right? Maybe you just ask ChatGPT and you just say, hey, is this what you want? And it gives you that, and you said, okay. Like, so basically, you need to encode it in your model, a moment to say, if this happens, stop and ask the user. So basically, it's not running by itself, but it still speeds it up, right? Like instead of saying, book a meeting with Bart, and then just say, okay, check. Well, is this a good time?
Yeah, and then
Like,
just
okay, good.
summarizes and
Indeed.
then final go.
Yeah, and I think that's also where the GenAI today, I see people thinking a bit more of GenAI models as like a productivity booster instead of a human replacement, right? Which I also think in this context, having some like a human in the loop that stops and says, "Is this okay?" is also indeed of a productivity improver instead of really replacing. At least my guess, 2025, right? And maybe then the next year we can sit down and see if this is the case, or if next 2026 we're gonna go further and these things are reliable enough. But that's a bit my guess. And again, the human in the loop may be another topic that comes up once we're looking into these things.
But in terms of use cases, capabilities, value creation, that would already be so powerful, even with the human in the loop.
No, I agree. And I think even like, and then if you look back last year, even not even 2024, in the beginning of this GenAI for coding and all these things, I remember a lot of people saying like, these GenAI models, they're 80% correct. They're never correct, but they're 80% correct. And I changed 20%, and that's still a big productivity gain. And I think that's still a bit the same theme that carries through, right? Like maybe they're never going to be 100% correct, but that doesn't matter because if they're 80% correct, it's already a win.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. With
Right.
you.
So
I think when it comes to Agentic, something that I hear a lot about as well, but I also think there's a lot of hype, too much hype, is done on reactive versus proactive.
can you elaborate on that?
So where we say today when we use, and I don't really agree with the definition, but today when we use GenAI, it's often reactive in a sense that an email comes in, do something with it. Like I have a manual trigger.
Yeah.
Right? And I think what is hyped up a lot about is that these will be more autonomous, that this is something that keeps running and does something proactively. But let's be honest, like every process that runs needs triggers to do something.
Yeah.
Right? So to me, it's a very, very vague definition.
You're referring to behavioral changes then maybe? Eventually in the future? Would that be like a potential implicit trigger?
No, I think like something proactive. I think what people don't really agree with the definition again, but something. Let's say I make a GenAI driven bot that continuously monitors all social channels to see if there's any negative remarks about my brand or about my company, and you give it the tools, Instagram, X, Blue Sky, whatever, and it automatically keeps scraping this for you, and you give it some quote unquote intelligence to do that, right? And which is in other words just smart prompting.
Yeah.
And also tools to flag something to take an action if they and that's I think today is being positioned more as an autonomous agent.
Yeah.
But it's very vague. Like what is the definition between something autonomous and non-autonomous, right? Because there is no, let's be honest, there is no general AI.
Yeah. And I think I think when you say proactive, reactive is very anthropomorphized. Is that correct, Alex?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I think like when you think of software, you don't have reactive and proactive. You usually have event-driven or schedule-based.
But I think for people that are further off, removed from more software engineering, to them this feels very autonomous, right?
Indeed. And I also think there's a lot of hype about agents because it's really, again, it's anthropomized, right? Like anthropomorphized.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I might feel like I'm saying, right, Alex, is that right? Okay, she doesn't know. Anyways, we're gonna roll with it. But when you think of agents, you almost feel like an FBI agent, like someone that has sunglasses, the earpiece, and is just doing stuff for you. And I think that's also why it gets a lot of the hype. But that's also why people use it very loosely.
True.
Because it's just like, it's like a person that they have a mission and they're gonna do it.
Yeah.
So I do agree. I think we also need better definitions for these things, and that's why even when I was talking about agentic workflows, I tried to make it very clear what I mean here, right? But yeah, I don't know if this. Well, maybe it will come. This proactive,
like
or
the idea of people
schedule-based.
dreaming, But
Yeah.
yeah, but it's true. It's like.
But I feel like if it does, I think it would be more. I think it would be more. I don't know if it will be next year.
Yeah.
I don't think it's something for 2025, to say the least.
Yeah, and some of the things that people are envisioning could actually be indeed part of it will be code, part of it will be models, part of it will be still a dream, if you ask me. But
Exactly.
but it's good
But I
to
think
keep
that
the hype alive. Definitely.
Well, I think I mean I'm not saying like maybe to be very clear as well. Hype is not all bad. I think just to get people talking about it, just to get people thinking about it, just to give ideas and like ask questions. I think it also moves it
fully
forward.
agree. It gives you also it moves investments.
Yeah, that's true.
It creates for better or for worse FOMO.
Indeed. Indeed.
But I think that's always the question. Like from the moment that you use it, like I think there's good arguments to say like make sure that you really understand it in order to also estimate like what is the value it will bring. That is,
Okay.
Otherwise, it's very easy to do things that will cost a lot and not result in anything.
But I think that's also true in general, right?
It's true in general, but I think for AI specifically, because there's so much hype for every
GenAI.
subtopic in GenAI, there's hype, and the new thing is Agentic.
Yeah.
Well, at the same time, it's moving very quickly. Like you have this combination that makes it's hard
Yeah.
to.
But the reason why I also say it's generic is because I also see that in just machine learning and AI. We used to see that a lot, and I think the difference with GenAI is that in a way it's easy to get from 0 to 1. It's faster because the models are there. But like I've seen projects that were 2 years in the making for machine learning, and after 3 months, people were asking for some feedback, and then they kind of inflated a bit the results to make it look better, and then like it kind of snowballed, and 2 years later is like, and then I've even seen something that in the process of these 2 years, the legislation changed, which made the use case a bit irrelevant. And I'm saying a lot with my MLOps hat on, because then the counter proposal is like, okay, instead of making this big thing for 2 years and then deploy after 3 months, and then you need to make it easier to deploy another one.
Yeah.
But I agree, I mean I fully agree with you, but I wonder if for GenAI, because the models are trained, because it feels like it's easier to get from 0 to 1 or to scope it down. I think not every use case. If it's, I don't want to see less of a problem, but it's not as severe as for the traditional AI or traditional machine learning stuff.
I think the big difference between GenAI and traditional AI is the speed of development.
Yeah, that's true.
And
Like-
the pre-trained context.
Yeah, like if you look at back 8 years, all Kaggle competitions were won with XGBoost.
True.
And every month there was new things, but 6 years later, so it was still XGBoost that won everything on Kaggle.
Yeah.
Right, like, and that we don't really see, like the stability, like what is the best thing, and it's still going to be the best thing next year. Like, it's really hard to predict in general.
I also think that even the tooling, right, the frameworks, the standards, it also is evolving quickly, right? So, no, but that I agree. Maybe I think we talked about a lot of stuff. We talked a bit about the guardrails, the LLM ops, and all these things. Maybe on the data privacy also, and maybe we can. Well, maybe let's talk about the data privacy first, and then I can segue to the next topic. We haven't talked about data privacy yet.
True.
Um,
I think if I look back at 2024, we have the EU AI Act. We have a lot of evolution on the NIST framework about models. So I think a lot of research was done on the side of data rules as well to, let's say, not only comply but also see what's coming in our direction. And I do think, being both on the research as on the development side of AI things, it was important to stay on top of things.
Yeah.
So we created a few, let's say, easy assessments to see the impact of changes and pre-assess a future project as well. So I think that's very valuable, both from a toolkit side as from a knowledge partner position. And I do think it opens a lot of, let's say, opportunities for companies to better understand the impact of their project and to better assess the go-to-market strategy, definitely.
Yeah, I do see indeed that the legislation, I feel like legislation is a bit of a quote-unquote slow process, and I think when you contrast that with GenAI, the difference is even bigger because GenAI is moving so fast. But I do see indeed like the EU AI Act has, I maybe it's a feeling that I have, but this year I felt like it became more concrete, right? The things that I need to be worried about, or the things that I should flag, or the things that I should raise. Yeah, I see you nodding, Yannick.
Yeah, but I agree. I think it came into force this year, which also like is a big evolution because before there was not, let's say, a very mandatory framework. Although it's, let's say there are different opinions. There are people definitely out there that say that it could be a potential blocking for innovation. There are people out there that clearly emphasize on the must, like we have, we are in need of a framework because this could potentially threat some of our basic values. And I think all in all, I think it's a challenge for companies, definitely smaller companies, I think, to stay on top of that regulation and so forth. So I think that's also where we could play a role as being a trusted advisor and helping companies to scope what is, let's say, in line with the projected boundaries.
Yeah,
so I definitely think.
I think this also falls in the umbrella of like even like testing and all these things. Like, what are the things that we can move fast? What are the things that we need to slow down? What are the things that, it's okay maybe to take quote-unquote shortcuts, right? Like, what is the impact of this? It's something that we also focused on. Maybe also, so now segueing into you already mentioned the EU-AI Act, but also ethics and compliance. And I think GenAI now, again, going back to the GenAI stuff, ethics has always been a bit, in my eyes, more prevalent there because you're generating stuff and like the racist AI models and all these things, right?
Or there were a few podcasts about author rights,
True.
Strikes in Hollywood, some music artists that got a bit offended, some newspapers that were sick and tired of all the crawling of their database. A lot of monetization as well, I think.
There were also trials as well, right, for these cases, right? Which I don't know if there was any resolution on those. Do you know about it? But I do think that they also, they will set a precedent as well for future things, like Scarlett Johansson's use of for the thing, right? So I think there was also a lot of like the ethics and all. Like, I mean, even the bias and stuff, right? You mentioned like is it a postman or something, right? Maybe if the guy's Brazilian, would you just immediately assume, like there's also a bit, and it's always a bit of I do think that we need to do better in terms of the models and the safeguards and all these things. But I also think it's very difficult because in a way, the models are always, like, it's always biased, right? Like the predictions you're making, in a way, it's biased, right? But the thing is, like, we have to basically choose what are the things that we say it's okay and what are the things we say it's not okay, right? If you look at, there was years ago, like, I think it was, what was it? For managers, they would have an AI screening CVs before GenAI, and I think they were passing more males for manager roles, right? And if there's a clear explanation because historically there's more, but is this something that we want? Do we want that bias to be in the model, right? So in a way, it's like you have to kind of slice and dice what is okay, because in the end, models, they just kind of track correlation, not causality, right? And we need to basically slice and dice what are the things that we actually is okay for the model to have that bias and what is not. So I also think it's, and again, GenAI, the hype, the fact that we are generating stuff makes it like, if you ask, give me a picture of a Brazilian, maybe there'll be a lot of things that for you it's okay. Maybe for me, I'm going to think it's racist or not, right? Like, and and if it's just there's even, have you ever watched the show Community? It's like the community college. Yeah, how they have like, basically it's like it's the same creators of Rick and Morty. I think it's funny, but the guy, they have a mascot and then they try to make it the least offensive mascot. And the name of the mascot for the community college is Human Beings. And it's just like a weird, like, it's like a guy in a white suit with like a blurred mask or something, because they're just trying to do the most general thing, because they're trying to be politically correct. And I'm wondering, like, if you say, give me an image of a Brazilian, where do we draw that line as well? Yeah. Because there need to be some traits that say, oh yeah, that guy is Brazilian. But at the same time, where do we draw the line to say, okay, this is not okay and this is okay?
I think companies do have like an obligation to do a lot of de-risking. I think that's clear. So de-risking means framework, iterate, and definitely learn. I think it's a very steep learning process. The most important thing there is that everything's evolving so fast. So there are definitely improvements on that. A lot of, let's say, committees, initiatives, and reviewing and evaluation initiative as well on that line. So the only challenge, I think, at the same time is that it's moving so quickly, and there's always this balance between trying something out and the fear of, is it already mature enough for us to try and play with it? So I think that balance definitely for companies is a bit of the pivot, but I do think everything's heading in the right direction. And then, you can debate on it. And I think companies are at the moment very aware of the potential reputational impact of trying models, using client data and so forth. Even, I'm not saying we're there yet, but like the awareness at companies has never been that prominent or like on the radar than it's ever been before. I think we had GDPR in 2018, new law on privacy in Belgium. Moving from there, I think compared to awareness about data encryption, about privacy has never been that much on the radar than it has ever been before.
Yep.
Not saying that we're there yet, but also on bias of models and so forth, awareness has never been this big, if you ask me.
No, but I agree.
That doesn't mean we're there, eh? So
but I agree.
Yeah, I fully agree with what you're saying, Yannick. And I think the concern that you're raising, Milo, is also like, if we look at 2024 then, biased models, I think a lot of this is to some extent covered in the AI Act. Like if you use this, like the risk classification, but there are also other, especially in the finance sector, a lot of other regulations and compliance guidelines that's basically enforce you to not be biased on certain decisions that you, I think, need to implement at a local level to make sure that you have the right guardrails in place. I think the only reason why we're discussing, like for example, a racist model is because there are so few players in this space.
True.
Because if there were a lot of players, then you just use the player that is right for your use case, right? And I think, but that is definitely a challenge. That there are only today, like I think if it's 10 is a lot to that have the resources available to build a model from scratch. I think that is definitely a challenge, and that is why we need these guidelines.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to, and I fully agree with Yannick saying, we have GDPR, we have the AI Act in Europe, we also have the DMA since March or April something this year, the Digital Market Act, which also puts a lot of focus on data privacy or handling data correctly. And I think for the end consumer that is very good. You do get, I think you touched upon it a little bit, like what is the effect on innovation. I don't think it improves innovation, but I also think that's maybe more of a hot topic, that the ship has sailed for Europe. Like we don't have any big players whatsoever. Eh? You can maybe say Mistral, but there are no big cloud providers in Europe. There's a lot of other things that make it difficult to build something like that in Europe.
Yeah,
and again, I agree. Like it's good for the end consumer short term, but like something like take for example OpenAI. What they did from the beginning is just say a big fuck you to everybody and just took everybody's data. Yeah, it would never have flown in Europe. Eh? Like it would not have been possible to do that. And there is the argument like because of that you can innovate. Whether that it's very much like it has two sides, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's true. Maybe it's funny, not funny at all, but tangential to this. One thing that I forgot the article that I was reading, but they also referred how most of the GenAI assistants, they're women voices, and for me it was like, oh, that's true, right? You don't hear a lot of like ChatGPT and all these things. Most of the time it's women.
Is it? Huh?
Yeah, like, and for me it was a bit of a light bulb moment, right? Like how it kind of plays a bit like, like the helper and all these things, how women are portrayed and all these things. So just a quick side note, you also mentioned guidelines as well. And I think one other thing that happened was the guidelines for what is open source AI, right? That we covered not like second half of the year for sure. Which I also thought definition
of what is OpenAI.
Exactly. Yeah. Open source AI. Because OpenAI, maybe people.
You're right. Yeah, confusing.
So yeah, because indeed, there's a lot of models that they were like they call themselves open source, but like now, like, yeah, usually have open source software, but like, what is open source AI? Because do you have access to the data? Do you not have access to the data? Do you have access to the weights? Can you use it for anything? Can you not use it for anything? Meta has like an in between, like they let you use for most use cases, but not all of them. And before they, but this is also something that we saw more consolidation, a standard in the, I don't know if it's legal, but like a standard on the artifacts, right? Like a more cold definitions of what does it mean to, and this is from the open source initiative, right? So it's a very known organ for this.
Yeah, all of that is just to prove that the market is still very maturing. Like
exactly. And there's a lot of attention to it, right? So again, if you think that ChatGPT is 2 years old, so this whole thing started 2 years ago, to see that we are here, it also shows that we're moving very fast, in my opinion. And segue into the next topic, the innovations in data tools and infrastructure, right? Talking about open source. You want to say something?
Maybe just one step back when we talk about
Go.
compliance, but because we were mostly discussing 2024, right?
Yeah.
2025. So 2024 brought, especially with the AI Act, a bit of a view on roughly what are you supposed to do when it comes to transparency, these type of things, when it comes to making an assessment of what type of risk do we fall under. And I think we roughly have a gut feeling idea on what to do when, but we don't really see it translated into frameworks that create a certain transparency, right? And I hope for 2025 that this becomes a bit more concrete.
Yeah.
Like that, okay, if I implemented it like this, if I used these, for example, LLMOps practices, then I'm okay. Like I hope that we get a bit this.
I don't know.
I think. Sorry, Maru, maybe to emphasize on that part. So we did some research. So with the data strategy unit, mainly focusing on like the 3 key trends. So there's an ISO 42001. There's a part of a NIST framework, so NIST National Institute, so very well known also for cybersecurity and others. So that one that really focuses on AI, and then of course the EU AI Act, where we already touched upon earlier. So those 3, we worked on a framework. So actually, if you have those 3 in mind for, of course, EU-based companies, we have like a checklist and we have like research done on that, because indeed, all of those things are actually there today. It's actually happening. So it looks like some theory for the future, but it's also a checklist. Yeah. So exactly, I think in line, but that does not mean fully in line what you were saying, that it's already market standard, that people are aware of it, that people are applying it on a day-to-day basis or using it as an assessment before they actually start a project, for example. I do believe what you say, that is something we're definitely going to see next year.
I think we're going to start seeing this next year, but in terms of the frameworks and making sure like with the best practices and all these things, I think we're not going to be in a mature place by the end of next year yet. I don't know. I feel like it would take a bit longer for people to really see what the frameworks are, make sure that everything's covered, to test it, to make sure that like once people that have implemented this, because it also, I guess, to gather the feedback to see if everything is compliant.
Yeah,
it may take some time as well.
Retrofitting, yeah.
Exactly. So there will also be some iteration. So I think we'll see some of it next year, or I hope we'll see some of it next year. But I think it will take maybe to end of 2026 for us to really say, yes, this, like for me to come to a colleague, a client, and say, this is the way to go. And if you do this, you can sleep well at night. Right. So now, going to the next subject, and we did talk about open source AI. So I also wanted to say, and when I was looking back on the episodes, the open source stuff with the Open Tofu, namely, also happened this year. I think it was 2024.
Ah, yeah, it was still this year.
I think it was still this year.
Feels like a long time ago.
Yeah, it feels like a long, long time ago, right? And maybe for the people that don't remember the Open Tofu, basically, HashiCorp, which is a company, they had the Terraform, which was an open source technology. And again, open source meaning that you can contribute, you can do this and that. And they decided to switch the license to something saying you can only use it if you're not directly competing with us, right? And they made a lot of noise. Some people forked the latest truly open source, quote unquote, version of it and created Open Tofu, and the idea they're going to diverge. There was also the Elasticsearch thing that, sorry, my bad. So Bart was fact checking me. But we did talk about it this year for sure.
We did definitely talk about it. Yeah.
Elasticsearch was this
there was
year.
a lot of evolutions on this
Yeah.
topic.
So maybe Bart just fact check me, and actually OpenTOEFL was launched on September 20, 2023. So actually it's been over a year. But we did talk about it this year for sure. So it's but the other thing is the Elasticsearch. This was definitely this year. You can check it. That I'm sure.
No.
I'll put money on it. The Elasticsearch, basically they were open source. They removed the open source license because they had issues, quote unquote, with I think namely AWS.
And this is longer ago, right?
This is way longer ago. But then this year they actually went back to open source.
Yeah. Very recently, I think.
Very recently, yeah, indeed. So there was also some movements on the open source things. But now going back to innovations in data tools and infrastructure. So what is maybe moving a bit away from the AI / Gen AI, more in the data tools, data engineering tools. What is there something that I know it's? I've heard feedback from people that listen to the podcast that we talk a lot about AI. I think it's also hard not to talk about AI.
Yeah, that's true.
But if we had to look, is there something that really caught your attention on the more data engineering tools or just software engineering, maybe even more in general?
I think as a more, let's say, big time trends, I think we see in 2024 was a bit the year where lake houses became like a unified default as a workplace where you store your analytical data.
Can you define lake house for people that heard this for the first time now? If they think it's like a house by the lake.
Yeah, if we look back,
Google Images.
Yeah, as ChatGPT.
If we and this timeline is a bit vague on me, yeah. So bear with me. If we look back 10 to 15 years, everything was in warehouses, which
ideally on-prem.
Ideally on-prem, which especially for analytical workloads began to run into its limits. So we saw a lot of adoption of data lakes initially via Cloudera or these type of Hadoop distributions. Later, we saw this movement to Parquet on things like S3 and stuff like this, and engines to query that. And the trend towards a lake house is basically a combination of those. That you have a data lake where you can, for example, land data, like data that you get from different sources, or where you can store unstructured data. And from there, take that data and put it into a more structured environment. In other words, your warehouse. That's where the two, like a lake house, a combination of a data lake and a warehouse. And then what we see is that almost all big players in this space, think Azure, think Snowflake, think AWS, they offer this now. This quote unquote the modern data platform on a lakehouse infrastructure, and they all implement a little bit differently. But I think what we see in 2024 is really the year. Like this has become the default to think about a modern data platform.
Sure, it's reliable, it's
Yeah.
tested, all these things.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is it tightly related, more maybe from a business point of view, to the vast increase of the use of semi-structured and unstructured data in a company context as well? Do you think it's linked to that maturity?
Definitely linked in the sense that it gives you a lot more flexibility on unstructured data. That definitely. I think what it comes down to is also like the big move towards ELT versus ETL, where in a traditional setting we were extracting data, transforming it, and then loading it into a storage. Where now we extract the source data, the raw data, load it into our storage, so we have it also for later ad hoc analysis, and then transform it to do something with it. And the challenge of that latter approach of loading raw data is that you often don't really know the structure yet, or structure might change through time. So landing that in a unstructured storage, like a data lake, is much easier.
Yeah, otherwise you'd break
Exactly.
the pipe. Yeah.
And what we see now in parallel is that you also have a lot of, especially with the LLM movement, is that you have stuff like PDFs, knowledge bases. You have stuff like pictures that you want to store.
Yeah,
like
object.
Exactly. Yeah.
Also in the LLM, you also see more that like Snowflake and all these things, they are trying to bring more these the AI to be built in on the infrastructure, the
Exactly.
computer, and all
Also,
these things as well.
yeah.
Like you mentioned Postgres before as well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But that to me is really like I think the lake house is here to stay for the coming years.
Yeah, indeed. I think, yeah. No, I agree. One thing that for me, and this is very, it's very overfitted on my news gathering.
I'm curious what's gonna come now.
UV.
Oh, UV. Yeah, that's a big.
I feel like for me, this also.
I think you need to explain a bit what UV is.
Yeah, UV.
Yeah, maybe also for part of the audience sitting in this couch. Right?
So this segment, this area. No, so this is for Python developers.
Okay.
So usually there's ways to like manage your dependencies, to package, to basically distribute these things. And Python is one of the main downsides of Python is that first it lacks a bit of standards. And second is that the tooling is very fragmented. There's a lot of different tools, and the latest one is UV, which is from a company called Astral. The same people that create another tool called Rough for people that are this a linting tool. But to me, really, this time it feels different. It feels like the community is really rallying behind UV. It's a tool. It's a tool built in Rust. So, Rust. Anyways, so. Yeah, I'm actually very optimistic that this will be the way, like the mainstream way in 2025. I don't know if there's going to be as big of a change, because like tools like PDM came as well, or Hatch and all these things, and I did hear some noise, but nothing compared to the noise that I hear around UV.
Maybe for myself, being more like a bridging person between technical and business value. Is going all the way from standards to CI/CD to and maybe second question, sorry, combining two.
Yes.
Why do you think this is actually going to change and the other initiatives weren't?
So it's not necessarily to answer your first question. It's more on the Python development. You can use these things on CI/CD, but it's not like a CI/CD tool.
Okay.
Right. So it's something that you can use when you're calling the continuous integration or deployment stuff. But it's really more focused on the Python level. Why I think this is different? One, I think it is the space is more mature. Two, there is a company that at least that exists now. So there's people that invest a lot of time on this. So they actually move very fast. Third thing is the user experience is the nicest one that there is for now. It also learns from other experiences. It is more mature, but they learn also from experiences from other tools and from other programming languages as well. But I think the main thing is that I do see a big community uptake and a lot of people that are very passionately advocating for this tool, which, like if you include having community around using the tool, it makes a huge difference, right? Like even if you have the best tool in the world, but no one uses, it's a bit like if a troll, how does it go? It's like if a tree falls but no one hears, does it? It's a bit like that. So I think all those things combined, the fact that they're always trying to implement the standards quickly, that we have more standards and all these things, I and also the things that I hear, I do have a feeling that this is gonna stay for a while. So it's a very, very niche thing, but something that to me also stood out this year as well.
I was wondering about the infrastructure part. Is real time still something we need to talk about, or nothing really changed about real time in 2024?
Well, for me, I'm maybe a bit biased as well because we're talking about GenAI, and most of the times when you're talking, GenAI, real time, I'm thinking of real time as a event driven, right? So you do something, and then right away I give you something back, right? So real time, is it a second, a millisecond? Maybe depends a bit, right? I'm calling everything real time. When you talk about GenAI, most of the stuff you do is, most of the applications like chatbot and all these things, like Bart's example on someone ringing the doorbell, that's real time.
Yeah, indeed. Companies also, I think, more thinking in event-driven, in real-time orchestration.
Yeah.
I think definitely the large companies we interact with, they still have a lot of batch infrastructure, still have a lot of operating systems that are anywhere close to near time. Yeah. So that's why I was like, maybe
I think
it's 2024 and 2025 still about real time and the challenges around that.
I think I'm curious to hear what Bart thinks as well. If you think of, now I'm talking about AI, this is where I'm more ingrained in, let's say. traditional machine learning or AI or data science, however you want to call it, I still think it's a bit more batch based. It's like more on the ELT or ETL processes, at least as I see it. The Gen AI, I think it's way more on the real time side. People are, I think it's also more intrinsic on the experience you have with ChatGPT, right? You do something, you wait, and then you get something back. Challenges, I think things can all one thing I see here on the notes, and we also talked to the CEO of Red Panda, right? Which he also brought this up, how you can have basically streaming data. So basically data that kind of continuously come in. And in that process, you can also embed some AI in there. I think, and again, maybe just the streaming thing, I remember from the conversation that it's a bit of a in between the two, the real time and the batch thing, right? I think real time for Gen AI is there. It's going to stay. In terms of challenges, there could be new challenges that we create, quote unquote. Like if you want to host your own models, if you want to have, I don't know. Another thing that we saw is that you can have an LLM router, quote unquote. So basically, depending on the question, you can say this is something to use a very expensive big model that you use to use OpenAI. Maybe this is something you can host it yourself. There's like Ollama, which is something that basically for you to host your own models. Maybe you can put on top of Kubernetes and stuff. Like there is some stuff you can do. If you today we found a way, in my opinion, right? There will be. I do think that's something that is going to come more as well in 2025, right? Because people are going to be worrying more about it. I think also as people use it more, okay, this is there to stay. Is there any way we can make it more efficient? Could cost, et cetera, et cetera. There's maybe also another question there. What do you think, Bart? I'm curious also to hear your thoughts on this.
I put this down for my hopefuls in 2025.
Okay.
Real time. Real time spans a lot, so I think what we're talking about is real time, quote unquote, data analytics. Like, I mean, what we're not discussing here is like transactional systems, right? Like everybody agrees there, like you need to be close to real time.
It's more on the consumption side.
Yeah, it's more on the consumption side. So I think the challenge there that we have today is that where you have this in a more, let's say, batch process, where we have today ELT, we're just discussing, we have a lot of more or less tools that have become standards. If you take dbt for transformation, these type of things, because what you typically need to do when you ingest data, let's assume it's real time, it's going to be multiple data sources, and you need to do some transformations on them. You need to bring them together to get insights, take an action, trigger your agentic AI, whatever you want to do. And I think the challenge there is that it's still requires a lot of engineering effort, unless, and that's not the case today, unless you have set up everything from scratch, really as in an event-driven manner.
But that I agree. 'Cause I think also relates to Yannick's point a while ago that we're not like these are not all start from scratch projects, right? There's a lot of stuff that already exists.
The reality is that 95% is not start from scratch, right?
Exactly.
So, and I think like real time becomes easy when you have a full platform set up event driven, which is often not the case.
Yeah, aka greenfield.
Exactly. And even if it's fully event driven, and let's assume that you use something like Kafka or something, like it's still a lot of like there's not like let's use this tool and we can join these these different streams, et cetera, these different queues. It still requires a lot of engineering know-how. Like this standard in a non-event driven system where when it comes to data processing, at least, like there's dbt, but maybe there are different sources, and like there's lakehouse, but maybe there are different tools underlying that. Like it's relatively easy for someone to switch environments and still be productive, just learning to understand different sources and destinations. I don't think you have that yet with real time. So you have some evolutions where like Materialize, which is a data platform that allows you to do these type of things where you can basically build more like SQL-like views and tables, but they're up to date with real-time data. So, but they're, and you can actually use them with dbt, but there are very few standards. Like it's, and I hope in 2025 we will see more like that. You can do that a little bit with DBT with incremental views, but it's not really real time. You can do a little bit with micro batching, but it's a bit misusing it to get something done.
So you mean like make sure I understand. When you're saying like real time, you mean more like Yannick went on a website today, like now, and I have a dashboard and I can see Yannick's how do you say, like history? No, the flow, like the website flow. Like, how do you call it?
The traffic behavior.
Like the traffic behavior. I can see that within a second or something in my dashboard. That's.
I was maybe more, as a use case, I was more thinking about the dynamic pricing for EV charging.
Okay.
Because if you take into balancing, grid, cost of distribution, all of that should be close to real time, which is not the case today, but I think it could be a very powerful use case.
I see. Okay. So basically, like based on the input we have now, you have to compute something and you already make changes on the actual pricing of the infrastructure. But that's like, just so I understand better, like, so there is still an ETL process, which today is very much batch, but you want to make that from the new input to the actual new output to make it very, very...
It's maybe a bit... let me try to, make a simpler use case.
Yes.
Right? So I have an event. A visitor is on my e-commerce website.
Okay.
I get this trigger, real-time trigger. This trigger, I'm gonna link this person to his historical card, and I know this person was looking at these and these data, right? It's going to be Black Friday, so I'm gonna send him an email. If you finish this card now, you get 50% reduction. But what that means in a very minimal setup is that let's say you use Shopify, you pull that into your data warehouse, you have a rich view on this customer, like who is this customer, where does he live? Is it maybe a VIP customer? Can we take a loss on this customer because we want to keep him? What was his cart history? Like you have all this information about the customer. Plus you have this real-time trigger, like, this customer is here now. There's an intent.
Yeah, intent to buy.
And you want to bring this together, like this information about a profile and what is happening now, and then do something with it, which maybe sometimes is called reverse ETL. We are ingesting this data, transforming it into some conclusion, and that you want to do something with then next. Okay. And in a very minimal setup, like your Shopify stuff, like every hour lands incrementally in your data warehouse, so you have more or less an up-to-date profile. But from the moment that you say, okay, I have this real-time trigger, I need to do something with it now, then suddenly you can't use the T in DBT anymore to transform it because data-wise you could, right? Like you can perfectly come to a SQL-based transformation, but DBT is not real-time. So you need to start adding custom stuff there.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Which should not be needed because in the end it's just a data transformation.
I see.
But because it's not really there now, or you need to maybe a bit misuse how you're doing it, you're gonna build like a custom Python script to cover these things. And before you know it, because you don't want to respond to this trigger, but like 50 of these triggers, you're gonna have either 50 different Python scripts and not really knowing what happened, or you're gonna say, okay, no, this is really not keeping, and this is not. We're gonna go all the way. We're gonna go Kafka, and you need to fully redesign the system.
Yeah,
and like there is no good way, no good easy way to integrate these type of things now.
But we just discussed it, but agents will solve that next.
Yes.
No, but I really like the example because it's very tangible, and it's exactly the gap between end user expectations and potential future behavior, and like still the way to there is way more steps than an end user envisions at the moment.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like the idea.
Yeah, indeed. I think but I agree. I think today I'm thinking again like of recommendations or something. Like if you want to trigger the email, if you ask me today, I'll probably think of like feature stores and like a REST endpoint that like calls just that to get the context, and then you have machine learning whatever to generate the email. But I guess what you're saying is like we don't like it's very crafted. You still need to craft a lot of things, put a lot of things together, and when you craft
very case by case,
and when that doesn't scale very well as well, right? And that's a good point.
I do think it's a fair tool and infra challenge for next year, and any maturity still.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
the data space still to.
I agree, but I also agree that saying I'm gonna start from Kafka from scratch now, it's not the solution. Like I don't think it's not gonna solve the problems that we have today, because most people are not gonna say, okay, let's restart from scratch and just do this whole thing. And
I think if you start something new, a tech solution, application platform, whatever, I think from an engineering point of view, there are very strong arguments to make why you should do this event-driven. I think from longevity, finding skills, finding people, being able to grow this, I think you should doubt yourself.
But that's also what I was gonna challenge as well. Like if you have just the standard data engineering team,
Yeah, it's
like how many of them will say, oh yeah, no, we're all comfortable, we can do this. I can give you this in 3 months and I have zero uncertainty because I've done this multiple times and this, and I can see there's a lot of examples online, there's a lot of documentation, so I can do this. I also don't think that's...
fully agree.
But again, I think you're more in the space than I am, but that's my perspective, right? I do think DBT is something that most data engineers will know. Spark, most data engineers will know. But yeah, like the streaming stuff, not sure how there are we already.
And I think when we talk about Spark and DBT, what it comes down to today is doing something with data, which translates to SQL.
Yeah, indeed. Today I think SQL.
And I think there I hope, and that's what Materialize is trying to do, for example, like that we see that also becoming more of a standard in the real-time world. But we're not there yet.
Yes, we're not there. So maybe on the last data innovation and leadership in AI, what should technical data professionals, so I'm thinking data engineers and GenAI engineers and machine learning engineers and people, someone from Dataroots, for example, what should they focus on to stay relevant in this future, this 2025 future? So you already mentioned that you would like to see some more real-time easiness. Do you think that's what people should focus on?
I maybe have a less hopeful one for the future.
Now there's a counter question.
Yeah.
No, when it comes to like what should you as a person in the space be doing, and I think especially people that are today coding
in the technical space. Yeah.
In the technical space, I think what all these AI tools do today already, and I very much do this myself as well. And I see like leverage smart tools to more quickly write code. And I think if I compare myself with now versus 2 years ago, there's a very significant difference in how quickly I can get a prototype out, with the emphasis on prototype. But I think what this will mean is that the market will have a higher expectations in terms of the efficiency of the average software engineer. And I think if you do not keep up, like this is a serious risk of getting burnout because the expectations will increase. That's honestly my my concern for the future for
developers.
For developers, yeah.
Developers.
If you don't keep up, you will still get more questions because expectations will change, and that's not a healthy combination, I think.
I read an article. Sorry, Mario, but I read an article in that context that for junior developers it's considered as negative because they don't fully understand every advice that is given by a Copilot. But for medium and senior, like the efficiency, effectivity, consistency, and everything, you see a gigantic uplift. So I do think that's maybe the small, let's say, counter argument or small like nuance I wanted to bring to the answer. Like copiloting for somebody who has no, let's say, solid background or very little experience could be also a risk of not fully understanding and not fully, let's say, going through the growth curve.
Yeah. I think also, I fully agree. I was going to say, I agree with also what you're saying, that the expectations that people need to be productive are going to increase. But I also think indeed like coding with AI assistance is also, there are some different skills, right? Like to review the code, understand the code, see if this is really how you want to do it. Because I think if it's easier to churn out code, but even for us, I think most of the times you need to understand what's there. And I think that part, to make it easy to understand, needs to be more there. I see.
You're talking about the challenge for juniors now.
Juniors especially, because I think juniors, like they're less concerned about how to read the code. Like it's easy to, if you have to change a function, it's easier maybe to just create a new one and keep the old one, right?
But I agree with that, and I think the challenge of GenAI is that, so before you could bring the argument, they're going to copy paste something from Stack Overflow,
which of course happened.
Which of course happened, but it was much more harder to like one-on-one copy paste it, and it would work. Like you still have to tweak it, right?
You still have to understand it.
You have to understand it to make it work. And with GenAI, it's easier to make something that just works without truly understanding it.
Yeah.
And now the downside, to add to that, Bart, is it will run in the given context, but to what extent is it actually stable, maintainable? Is it? And that's, I think, the challenge. Now you can run it and it will work, but is it like solid?
But I think that same junior, if this is the level, if you're concerned about whether or not what he builds is good, then like without GenAI, you should also be concerned about it. And I think what it comes down to, again, is a bit like the dev of best practices, having defaults on how do you write code, how do you test code, bit of test-driven design maybe. And it's, maybe we need to have more hygiene on that for starters going forward.
Yeah.
But it's
that's
not
actual
like
concern.
But it's not like the solution on that is not a very difficult one. It's just good DevOps practices.
Yeah, it's there.
Reviewing pull request.
But I also think that now we're talking a lot about software engineering.
Yeah.
And I think at least for like data scientists, they have a, how is it called, misfame? It's not misfame, but like infamous for not following as much the software engineering practices.
Single soldier armies, or
yeah, something like that. So I think it's also like DevOps is the answer is not new, it's there, we should all know it. But I also think there's a lot of people that are, well, two things. First, most of the stuff we do is in Python, which is a very forgiving language, right? If we're using something that is strongly typed, that is compiled, there are already more guarantees, but Python, if you just do it runs, it's fine. So I think it increases even more the importance of testing, the importance of understanding, covering test cases. Even if you want to add static typing to already exclude a whole bunch of tests that you would need to do, right? But then there's also, data scientists, they used to be, well, even in engineering, like with the notebook stuff, how a lot of people say it's an anti-pattern. I don't want to necessarily discuss the use of notebooks, but I have an impression, and I don't know if it's been changing, but the traditional data scientist, it wasn't someone that is super comfortable with all the DevOps stuff, to implement all the things, to really, I also think there's a lot of, again, POCs, a lot of experimentation, and sometimes adding these guardrails also, it feels like it slows you down, even though I also have a theory that it will also speed up on the long run, because you can, to modify and to fix bugs, is going to be much faster because it's more organized. But there's also a bit of resistance in that sense. I feel like I have to really, I don't know, even stuff like MyPy, right? MyPy is a static type checker. And it was by default on the project, but then I just saw that people were just putting any's everywhere. So basically just ignore all the types everywhere, right? And then you make progress, but then if you need to change something or something breaks, it's much harder to understand. Like me, when I look in that code and I try to understand what it does, it's much, much, much harder.
That brings us back to Bart's remark about the hygiene.
Indeed, but I think it's also
and I think if you bring that back to more like the leadership, more business level, like I think there's companies need to understand like it has an impact on how fast they can go to market with new features, but that it also has an impact on the workforce, that they need to support it, that they need to guide this, but also that they need to enable this and allow for experimentation. There's a bit two sides of the same coin. But I think also what goes a bit hand in hand when it comes to leadership is also a more focus on, and I think we've been discussing this for the last years, but I think it's becoming even increasingly important with LLMs. It's like a focus on data as a valuable asset. So data is what will enable Murilo's agentic agents. And I think when it comes to data, and to make the link there from DevOps, companies also need to look at their data more in a DevOps kind of way. I think that the new hype term for 2025 will be data ops.
But it's not a new term, huh?
It's not a new term, but it is something where we don't have any clear standards either. Like we don't have clear standards on.
I wanna indeed.
Yeah.
It's something like LLM ops. I think it's very you can draw parallels. Like there are subdomains where we are making evolutions, but there is no clear, like this is how you do it. But I think this has become more and more important to show like there is a clear data lineage. There are some checks on the ingestion. You have monitoring of what you have actually there. You have a clear observability on your data. You know in which products, which derivatives of your data are being used, and I think from the moment you really want to go to the next level with these AI-driven solutions, you need to have that in place. That is, and I think that is an understanding that is not really there yet because it's really behind the scenes. Like you don't see, like if you're not working as a data engineer, you don't see the challenges. That's a bit I think that is it's very hard to make the argument like there will be an ROI because you do this.
Yeah.
It's more of a like this is a prerequisite that you need to have good enough in order to create value, and that makes it hard in these discussions.
And I think also on boardroom level, I think that the gap is as big as Bart just mentioned. It is like there are more and more ambitions to do bold, innovative things, and also from a budget perspective, I think it's equally important to take a step backwards. Like so in French we say reculer pour mieux sauter. So take a step back to then take at least to leapfrog or take 2 steps forward. So the data catalog, the lineage, better understanding who's using which data, who is accountable for which domain, all of those things to then, when that's all done, jump into more, let's say, more tangible or more exotic data use cases.
I agree. And I also think that if you take the least optimistic or the worst case scenario is that you just kind of build, you don't have very solid foundations, you just build on top of that, and at one point
something cool on a very
shaky foundation. Yeah, and then at one point just everything, the house of cards kind of like all fall down, right? We heard also from an internal Slack discussion that the use of GenAI, it was for university projects, so I'm assuming they're more inexperienced developers, that they just kind of had to stop because they just it was very easy to add stuff, but again, the foundations weren't there, the designs weren't there, the maintainability wasn't there, and then at one point they just, okay, we just cannot continue with this. This is no one knows what is done, no one wants to touch anything either because there are no tests, right? So if you change A, then maybe B breaks and you don't see it, and people just kind of said, okay, let's just start from scratch. And I think that's the worst case scenario. That's what I think going to
that's maybe one of the more skeptical key takeaways for next year, but I do think it's a valuable one.
I do think, I think the skills for software, I think maybe to frame it a bit differently, like the skills of software engineers is constantly changing. I think the change now with GenAI is maybe a bit more clear. But I think the ability to understand code, the ability to write good code, the ability to to test, to make sure you are promoting these things becomes more important, right? So that's what I would also advise data or software engineers, but data professionals as well. And the other thing I would also say is to, again, like Bart said, like do try to use these tools. If you're not using, you are falling behind. Understanding the basics as well. It's something that the default software engineer, even, I think they are already familiar. They should be familiar with the basics because otherwise you are falling a bit behind, in my humble opinion.
And the same goes for, let's say, more hybrid roles, more business roles. The same goes, like if you're not testing it today, someone else will. So you're competing with somebody who's trying it out, who's exploring those things. So I think key takeaway is it's never too late. Today is the next best day to start, just for those who are maybe not experimenting with Copilot lookalike projects. Yeah,
and I think companies need to realize like this shift, like it needs the correct guidance. Like I think we, because we're very like hands-on involved in these things, we try to underestimate it. But I think when you look like just even historically, like people going from typing text in WordPerfect and MS-DOS moving to Office on Windows was a big change and required training, etc., etc. And I think even like people writing code now in VS Code and going the next step with Copilot and stuff like doing that efficiently is a big change. And we should not like, for some people it is not. For some people, they in their evenings they're very passionate, they try everything out, but I think we need to realize that is not the default. It's not going to go by its own. Like you need to invest in it. You need to invest in training of people.
Yeah, and one talk that we did, actually we had a conversation with Tim Lears as well a few days ago. Still going to release this. We also touched a bit upon that, like how there maybe need to be an effort for the tools to meet the users where they are more. In the sense, for example, embed the very simple, silly example, but like embed the LLM model in the email client instead of having people switch to make it easier for people to adopt. So it's like a smooth transition. But also there needs to be an effort from the users to really try. I think you need to go a bit outside your well-worn and tested way of doing things to really find this better way, right? And I think GenAI a lot of times is for this. Another example is like I started using Cursor, which is like a AI-focused VS Code fork, so an IDE. But there are some changes in the way that you interact with your code. There are some different ways on like where to search stuff, where to do A and B and C, which doesn't come as naturally in the beginning. But once you get used to it, it's like, yeah, I'm way more productive here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you can identify some ambassadors inside your company, you can be very vocal.
Indeed, evangelize
the values and about really setting up ad hoc sessions at first to do it slow and to just like emphasize on the benefits. I think that's how we also approach it in strategic exercises at the moment.
Yeah, really cool. And I think with that, we can wrap it up unless there's something else you want to say. Any inspiring last words, Yannick? Bart? But Yannick, maybe? Bart. Bart was gonna say something. Interrupt him. Go for it. I saw you're eager to go for it.
I think we could continue for at least another half an hour.
Yeah.
So I think
you continue to.
We touched upon a lot of topics. I think it was very, very nice. Also to see, let's say, the bridge between the impact for companies, the impact of technology on data as a whole. Looking back at a lot of podcast work that was done, zooming in and zooming out at the same time. So I really liked it and think it's very valuable to continue and see what 2025 will bring. So,
indeed, I think there's a lot of exciting stuff to look forward to, for sure.
Definitely.
Cool. All right. Then thanks, y'all. Thanks, Yannick. Ciao.
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 You have taste in a way that's meaningful to software people.
Hello, I'm Bill Gates.
I would recommend TypeScript. Yeah, it writes a lot of code for me, and usually it's slightly wrong.
I'm reminded, incidentally, of Rust here.
Rust.
Rust.
This almost makes